Alright, draft physics video. Reply to some physics truther named Piro. And it's going to be on the two-slit, single-slit stuff. And yeah, it's this is going to be, I think you'll find this interesting. I think you will. If you're an honest fellow, I think you'll find this interesting. Anyway, yeah, there's going to be some related videos on the Inmendum channel just about the idea of theory and modeling, which I think is an appropriate synonym for theory, which is a model. And they have a model of what's happening, and I have a model of what's happening. And I think if you compare those two models, it's kind of obvious which model makes sense and which one doesn't. But let us play along. Pause there.
The reason we know that the math, whatever math you figure out, isn't going to work of the particle going through one slit is specific.
Okay, so he says whatever you figure out isn't going to work because he knows the truth, and there's only one truth, and that is it has to be silly putty. So I mean, right? The premise of these people, they have this little tiny bit of a slight bit of evidence of something, and yet they're just talk as if they've proven something. You haven't proven anything. You didn't eliminate all possibilities. Like I said, you can go all the way back to particle gravity. The debunking was superficial. I mean, just, no detail. They didn't even try to make it work. They didn't want to hear it. And that's the simple truth. And it's just like the truthers. They don't want to hear that the CIA didn't do it. They don't want to hear the truth. And these people don't want a truth. They want their phantasmagorical, silly putty, bullshit, wishy-washy, mushy, incomprehensibly stupid solution.
Specifically because of the whole purpose and weirdness.
They're shamans, you know what I mean? They're medicine men. And they don't want somebody to take away the power of their mojo, their voodoo. They don't want somebody to point out how you just mixed an herb in a bowl and yeah, the herb has aspirin in it. They don't want to hear that.
Of the two-slit experiment. The fact is, where the particle goes depends on where the other slit is.
Well, see, I keep saying go back to the single slit, and he won't do it. So now he's, where the other slit is. Where the other slit is the same thing as saying how big the middle impediment is, and so he's not even getting that right. You don't move the other slit, you make the middle impediment bigger. Ugh. All right, so look, the real deal is the single slit. It's the same interference causing the pattern. The patterns are subtly different, but it's essentially the same thing. On, off at the same rates and all that kind of stuff. There's just different proportions. And so it's exactly the same effect in that sense. And so if you can explain the single slit, then you can explain the double slit. But there's no point in explaining the double slit, okay, without explaining the single slit. Because any explanation with a double slit implies that you can create these two waves conveniently and then have them interfere. Where the single slit creates a dilemma, because you don't have anything creating the two waves. I mean, I've been over this and over this. Alright, so my counter theory is something like this. Anytime you have matter, you have fields, energy around it, and there's electrons everywhere. Okay, now even in empty space, there's no way you can pump an electron because it's always a stream. You have to create a source and a destination with electrons. So there's no way to pump them out of something, because if you start pulling on them, they'll pull more electrons. And if you push them, obviously you're pushing more electrons in. You can't push or pull them out of something. So you can never have an electron vacuum. You just can't create one, because it's always a stream. It's always a bunch of particles. And that's why they find positions. Well, anyway, and especially around, okay, like ideally you could create an absence of electrons if there's an absence of protons. if there's nothing for an electron to be attracted to, and there, well, see, that's the whole thing. You have to think of the forces being infinite, in the sense that the movement of the quanta, the force, goes infinite, like gravity and all this other stuff. And so an electron is always going to be moved by the field. There's no such thing as a dead field. There's always a field that has balance. And in empty space, obviously there would be an imbalance in the field, unless it was the empty space in a perfect circle, where the energy was equal from all sides. So, but I'm just saying, but around matter you would never have a neutral field, a purely neutral field. So what you have is electrons that are subtly attracted, but they're repulsed by each other. And this is a common phenomenon in electric and magnetic. This is the Maxwell kind of stuff. Alright, so I'll do this picture first. So you have a positive charge and you have a negative charge. The curiosity is that when you do this math, right here next to the negative charge, the field is negative. Out here, the field is positive. See, the positive has a stronger, the inverse square law means that close to this charge, there's a negative charge. But because this is a bigger charge, the inverse square law means this one wins at a distance. I mean, let's say this charge is a 2 and this charge is a 1. That's all you need is a differential in the charge, and automatically out here you're going to have a positive charge, which means an electron is going to be attracted. But it's going to be repulsed as soon as it gets near this electron. Then it's going to get repulsed, and right in here somewhere is the balance place, the neutral. And that's where electrons end up staying, is in the neutral. They always move to the neutral. They stop moving when they get to a neutral, put it that way. And so between two densities of matter, there's always going to be charge. Now, the interesting thing about charge also is that charge would always line up on the sides of a flat surface. The bigger plane will end up being the charged part, and this edges will end up being field. So there's going to be field lines that are going to establish where the electrons will be located. And the electrons have a pressure between them. They won't get too close to each other. They're always going to be a certain distance from each other. So as you bring the two objects closer to each other, you'll have to reduce the number of field lines, and consequently the number of electrons in between the two surfaces, and you'll create more electrons on these edges. So you'll have less in the middle and more on the edge, on the bends of the field line. So further away from the opening, there'll be more electrons. Right in the middle, there'll be fewer, and right out here, there'll be more. So the point is, what I'm arguing is that when electrons are accelerated by photons, so the simple argument is the tiny photon hits the electron, is absorbed by it. That means the electron is accelerated, so the electron now moves. Now the point is that when the electron's in a field line, it doesn't move straight. It moves to the next neutral position. Alright, and so now the electron, instead of moving straight, has moved at a different angle. And so now when it finds a neutral, that means there's a force going this way. That force kills the acceleration in this direction, and it releases the photon in this direction. So that's diffraction. So if the electron travels straight, the photon's released straight. If the electron travels crooked, the photon is released at an angle. Not too terribly complicated. And depending on the frequency of the light, that is how quickly the photons are spaced, they will dictate how far the electron travels on this is a curved line essentially, and it will dictate how far on that curved line it will travel. And obviously if it travels further, the angle will be sharper the further it travels on that line. And the tighter the frequency, the more possible it is that it stops at a sooner location than the further location. It's a tipping argument. but I'm not going to go into that. But at any rate, that's why the frequency of the light would change the angle of the refraction, because it's either because the electron travels to a new location in the sense that it travels faster, or because it travels there's more of an angle because it's traveling slower. So you can sort of understand if there's a force field, you could understand a field pulling, that how fast you move through gravity will dictate how much you're pulled by the gravity. And it's the same kind of argument. So that's the only difference between, it's the same field, and if it's blue light or if it's red light, there's going to be a difference in how much it's deflected. It's going to be deflected more when it's red, which is the lower quote-unquote intensity, probably because the field energy is going to be stronger than the velocity of the electron. Alright, but it doesn't matter which way it is, but that is, it's got to be, I've got to finalize that to finalize the math, of course, but that's where the angle comes from. So it's all diffraction, and it's just electrons that are changing where the photons are admitted, the direction in which they're admitted. And you can sort of get a feel for that, because as the slit gets narrower, especially in the single slit, you start to lose all the pattern, because you're losing field lines, and you're creating more scatter because of the eccentricity of where the photons are getting, where they're hitting these sharper angles. So a lot more photons are just going out nowhere, where they can't be resolved. Maybe they can with photographic film, but they don't do this with photographic film anymore, so we don't get to see the true pattern. Anyway, another thing, Piero just keeps talking about math and all of this. The math doesn't consider what the light source is. There's nothing in the math that ever dictates, because you can have, this experiment is done with different kinds of light sources. Laser beams have a very flat, even distribution of the light. So when you have a laser beam, the middle of the light is the same intensity as the outside of the light. It's all the same intensity.
Could be a new
unfortunately, but when you have when you put the light through an aperture, you basically cone the light, which means the light is a lot more intense in the middle and weaker on the periphery. And obviously that would have a huge effect on the pattern in terms of how its intensity and how it's going to be resolved in this experiment. Yet in none of the math is that ever established what kind of light is going in. They just make the assumption, and that's how sloppy all of this is. It's not rigorous at all. It's not exact at all. All they're doing is saying the math gives them a vague idea of a pattern, but it doesn't duplicate the exact pattern. And for an experiment they're stating demonstrates or proves wave particle duality, they should be a little stricter than this. Lots of ways this experiment should have been done and tested, and they haven't done it. And it just seems obvious that that's the kind of the truther way is, don't test it because you might find out it's wrong. So alright, so I think that's enough of a starter. The argument on the two-slit experiment gets a little, I'll go through it just because it's worth, just so you understand my argument. And so what Piero's arguing is if I change the distance of this middle impediment, that is, I make it bigger or I make it smaller, the pattern does change. Well, so what? I mean, if I make the slit wider or tighter, it changes. So those are variables known, and that's a fact known. And my argument would certainly be is that just because the bigger you make this middle impediment, the more you change its field dynamics. So the real difference in the two-slit experiment, the thing that makes the two-slit experiment different than the single-slit experiment, is that you have two densities of matter. You have the dense matter of the outside slits, and you have the less dense matter of the interior slit. So I'm getting some diffraction film, and I'll be doing experiments to kind of demonstrate what I'm talking about here, because the reason why, as you make the impediment smaller and smaller and smaller, to make a gradient, what you're basically doing is changing you're making the dynamic more and more extreme, but in the sense of when you have a whole bunch of little, well, I'm not going to go into a whole bunch of little lines. I'll save that for another time. But there's still the same field energy. So what's really happening is there's a field intensity for this amount of matter, and the field intensity obviously would be bigger for the thicker pieces of matter, the more established pieces. So you have basically two kinds of field energy. Now the trick is, this is superposition in the true sense, is that these fields are different until you put an object in there. So if the electrons, once it affects the electron basically neutralizes and does the math between the two fields to find where the field line is actually going to end up being. So this is Maxwell's equations in magnetism, and those equations, it's a little bit complicated to figure out exactly how that happens, but it's when you put two charged, two negative things and you plow them next to each other, the field lines get quite eccentric, and and if you do the opposite, a positive and a negative, well, that's sort of also what's probably going to happen here. If this is a positive edge and this is a negative edge, then this will likely be a positive edge and this will be a negative edge, which is the inverse. So but I don't want to get into those kind of complexities. All I want to get into for the point of this argument is the size of this center impediment changes how strong these fields are, and it changes the balance between the two. So you're going to end up with field lines that might look tight here and then big over here, in the extreme. And another point to make is when these electrons, so think of the field lines as having electrons lined up on them. And so the point is the tighter I make the slits, the closer I make them together, the straighter and straighter the interior lines get. Okay, so the further away the two edges are, the rounder these field lines get. So in the straighter they get, the more I compress them, and the fewer there can be, because electrons don't like each other. So electrons will not tolerate being any closer than a certain distance from each other. And that's what reduces the number of the field lines in between things. So the closer they get, the fewer field lines there are. Which is also noticed quite dramatically in the single slit experiment. So in the single slit experiment, the wider the opening, the more lines. The tighter the opening, the fewer the lines. Important, because that's perfectly consistent with this idea that the field lines start to disappear. Okay, so you could go from 18 field lines, let's say, when the slits are wide, to just 2 field lines when the two surfaces are close to each other. Because the electrons have a standard of how close they will be to each other. They will not get closer than a certain distance from each other unless they're in some circumstance where the field forces them, because there's pressure on all sides. In these circumstances, there's no pressure coming from these directions, so obviously the electrons will spread this way. They'll bulge this way, this way and this way. So here's the two slits. The electrons will bulge in these directions, okay, as the slits get tighter. So the electrons are spreading this way as the slits get tighter. And as you widen the slits, the electrons relax and fill the void. But obviously that changes the angles dramatically. So as they bulge, you can kind of understand that the amount of deflection is going to be greater and greater and greater with the amount of the bulging of the field lines. The more curve in the field lines, the more arc in the field lines, the more off straight line path the electrons are going to travel. So therefore the more diffraction of the photon. Alright, so now, since I did this, let me contrast this to this guy's phantasmagorical explanation. So first, he won't deal with the single slit, but I'll explain with the single slit. First I'll do, I might as well just do the single slit. So the first thing, they have a huge problem. is that they have a single slit. How do you create two waves to interfere with each other? So what the premise has to first start off with is that a single photon, so we're talking about a single photon now, because both of these experiments with single photons still create the interference pattern. So it's not multiple photons interfering with each other, it's just a single photon somehow interferes with itself and causes a wave. Now this is the single slit experiment. This is how they say it happens. Alright, so there's a single photon, and they're saying it has a wave property. It has a wave function. Now the wave function doesn't go like this around it. Okay, it's not a round wave. No, the wave function for this photon, okay, is a straight line, like a triangle. And it spreads out. So this straight line is the wave function. Now see, this comes down to Huygens. This is how, the only way you can make Huygens work is this is how Huygens has to work. So the wave is in front of the photon, and it's somehow wider than the slit. Maybe infinitely wide. Which is also kind of non-intuitive in any kind of rational way. That sounds like impossible nonsense to me. But anyway, so it has to come in as a straight wave. So the single photon arrives at the slit as a straight wave. It's a flat, straight wave. And somehow it's carrying with it a frequency. So it's a single photon, not a bunch of photons at frequency. No, it's a single photon, and it has a frequency identity in that it keeps creating a new straight wave ahead of it. Remember, it's not a curved wave. So when it gets to the slit, it doesn't bulge because there's a curve that goes through here. No, that doesn't happen. Can't erase with this pen, but well, anyway. So just get how stupid this sounds, right? That the photon creates a straight wave in front of it, and that the distance and it creates not just a wave, but I mean it's creating another wave ahead of it. And the idea is that it's creating a bunch of little wavelets, an infinite number of them, because with an infinite number you can make the next wave straight, right? See, if I make a lot of these little things, all these little hump parts, right? This stuff here where it goes in, all of those start to disappear if I make an infinite number of them, and I end up with a straight line again. But their theory is that this Huygens guy says, this is reality, that this little photon, this single thing that Feynman says is a corpuscle, he says it's a particle, he says it's obvious it's a particle because when it hits an electron, and it does the same thing every single time. There's no half a photon, there's no quarter of a photon, there's no piece of a photon, there's a photon, nothing else. Nothing more, nothing less. Anyway, so Huygens says, alright, it has a wave front, and it creates its next wave front, okay, through an infinite number of little wavelets that create another flat wave in front of it. So now it's a wave. That's what making the wave. It has who knows how many of these things are in front of it. Maybe they think it does an infinite number of them. Who knows? It doesn't really matter. The point is they're saying this photon is creating this flat wave, and now when this flat wave gets to this slit, what's happening is all those little wavelets are liberated. Now they're all free. We're free, we're free. And somehow they are interfering with each other, and then the interference pattern decides the photon will end up here or here or here or here or here. Now it has nothing to do with where the photon went through the slit to them. It doesn't matter if the photon goes through here. It doesn't matter if the photon actually went through here. It doesn't matter if it went through here. For their perception, a photon going here or a photon going here creates exactly the same, whatever it is, probability wave here, and it decides it will go here, 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 by some sort of randomness that's somehow built into photons. So they somehow know where the other photons went, and they decide where to go. And it has nothing to do with where they hit here. Now, that's it. That's what they think happens. That's their explanation. That's their model. There's no evidence for any pieces of that. None of that can be demonstrated to be happening, but that's their model. Alright. And then when they get to the two-slit, they just change the whole argument. All of a sudden, now the wave can be bulged if they want. It doesn't matter because it's going to create two new waves. So now the photon hits, the straight wave, let's say, the Huygens, and now it makes two nice little bulged waves. And now the two bulged waves can interfere with each other, and you get the interference pattern. So this doesn't match this. It's not the same theory at all. They won't create the same effect. If you Huygens this, you would end up with two interference patterns. They would have one here and then one here, and that would just make the four-slit experiment. So, wouldn't work if you Huygens it. Alright, so the other thing to recognize is the math that currently exists, the only math I've ever seen for the two-slit experiment, describes this. This is what the two-slit experiment looks like according to the math. Alright, that's what it looks like. Now, not according to the math. Well look, let's reduce the intensity. So it looks like this by the math. The math is, yes, the center is big, and then the next one is a little smaller, and the next one's 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 a little smaller, and you do that on both sides. That's the two-slit experiment by the math. But nothing unusual, nothing to see here. The real pattern does this. Okay, I'll just draw it. I'll draw an outline of it just for the sake of making it more illustratable. So ignore this part and just pay attention to the bars. So this is what the real pattern looks like. And there might be 6 or 8 or 10 of these. Depending on how wide the slits are, will give you more of these bars. So that's back to my argument where it's really about the field lines are deciding how many bars. But you could have from, say, 12 bars in this middle section to maybe just 6, depending on how wide the slits are. And then there's a dead spot, and then they get big again, a little bit bigger, a little brighter, a little smaller, and then it goes one more time, little bit, little bit, little bit, little bit, little bit. So that's the real pattern of the two-slit. This is what the math says it is. This is what the math, this is what the math says. None of this, okay, is in the math. None of this. This is essentially the single slit experiment, this outline of the single slit with the tightest opening. So that's the tricky part, right? See, the total opening from here to here, if that was a single slit, you would see very tight, lots of bars. And this size, if it was a single slit, would give you this just, dull pattern. Just, this would just be a blob, blob, blob. So if you went with the real size of these slits, you should just be getting a blob pattern like that. But if you went with the total distance from here to here, then you would get lots of lines. So that's where the two are getting neutralized and blended together, is in these field lines. And because this mass is the stronger mass, the thick mass, it has a higher percentage of dominance over the pattern. So the wide slit is the controlling pattern. That means the lots of bars. And the narrow slit is doing the add these little extras. So if you just took the intensity extras, this is what the interior part is doing, the top part of this pattern. The top part of this pattern is being created by the field lines around the middle impediment, and the straight lines are being created by the big total opening. Alright, I think that's pretty damn good. Yeah, okay. So let's play some more of this shit.
So the particle goes through here, it makes bright bands, and it totally avoids the dark band. And if you move this other slit, where those dark bands are,
right, so you hear how it's kind of silly that is. You say, and move the other slit. You don't move the other slit, you change the thickness of the middle impediment. Ay.
Places that no photons fall, that changes. The dark bands move. Where no photon falls moves if you just move the other slit.
Right, if you make the center impediment bigger or smaller, you're going to change where the alignment of the on-off pattern will be. Right, because you're going to change these field lines. As soon as I make this center impediment smaller or bigger, it's going to change how much energy it's producing, which means it's going to change how far away the electrons are from each other and how much angle there is to their field. Just as if I make the magnet a strong magnet in the middle and a weak magnet on the outside, I'll get one pattern, in terms of field lines. If I make a weak magnet in the middle and a strong magnet on the outside, I'll get a different pattern. The pattern will change every time I change the intensity of the material field the electrons are being suspended in.
Now, how is that possible?
Electrons. Go back to Feynman's oldest lectures. I mean, the ones in Auckland will do it too, but I'm just saying that the old ones even do it. In terms of the fact that photons hit electrons. That's what they do. They make electrons accelerate. And then when electrons decelerate, they release photons. That's how it works.
If the particle's going through one slit. If the edge of the slit tells that particle where to go, or not tells, but interacts with it and makes it go a particular place, that should be unaffected by where the other slit is.
It should be if you don't understand what fields are and if you don't take into account what matter is. Okay, matter is protons and electrons. Matter is charged. And the charge of the matter, anyone can intuitively understand that the sun's gravity extends beyond the planet Earth. The sun's gravity goes out much further. Now, it can't suspend any size object. If an object is moving too fast, it won't be able to capture it. Okay, but the fact is that all matter, in the sense of the proton, has leftover pulling force. So the electrons that are orbiting, and they're not orbiting in my opinion, they're suspended, but anyway, it doesn't matter. The electrons that are being held by a proton, okay, inside of an atomic structure, there's still a force, a weak force, that the proton is still attracting electrons. It just can't hold them. It can compel them to move towards it, but because there's an electron in the way, as I pointed out, because there's an electron in the way, this electron can't get to the proton because the electron's in the way. Might be the neutron, but I don't want to get into the complexity of that. I mean, obviously to get the exact thing here. Okay, but he's going to get to math, so I'll get to the math when I get to the math. But I'll just say for right now, I don't disagree with most of the math because it's the same variables. There's no quantum factor in the math. The math only has the frequency of the light, the distance, the opening of the size of the slits, the distance of the slits, the distance of the target, and it doesn't even include the source of the light, which is the funniest part. But anyway, that's all that's in the math. There's no magic factors in there.
Unless there's a violation of locality, and somehow the edge of this slit is in communication with that.
Yes, that's right. I mean, wow, that sounds so incredible. You mean there's stuff called static charge? You mean that we might even be covered with electricity on our surface? We might even give sparks off when we touch a doorknob? Oh my God, that's amazing. That's crazy talk.
The other slit, and somehow it's coordinated.
Yeah, somehow fields are controlling where electrons exist. Yes, that's true.
And that's the problem.
There's no problem. As I just pointed out, it's not a goddamn problem at all. No problem whatsoever. All a physicist had to do was to look at this experiment and say what's more likely to be controlling the experiment. The incredibly dense matter that has millions and billions of protons in it, are the little tiny photon. Which one is controlling the experiment? The little tiny photon or the gigantically huge dense matter?
This coordination. Now, the quantum wave idea.
Quantum wave. It seems like we missed something in here. I think I must have made a boo-bah of some kind.
And if you move this other slit,
Yeah, we did
where
that.
those dark bands are, that's places that no photons fall.
Yeah, we did that.
That changes. The dark bands move. Where no photon falls moves.
Still can't speed
If you
it up.
just move the other slit. Now how it
Alright, back it up to 5 again.
with that other slit, and somehow it's coordinated. And that's the problem. There's this coordination. Now,
Yeah, well, Maxwell is my definition for the coordination and superposition, in the sense that once you put a charged element inside of the field, the charged element will do the math. It will do the field math, and it will make a compromise between the two fields it's feeling, all the fields it's feeling. And it will do what it has. It will do the product. It will create the product of the force, and it'll go there.
quantum wave idea, which is just a proposal, because
All right, let's understand. It's not just a proposal. It's the whole foundation of quantum mechanics now. They never talk about it as if this duality isn't a certainty, an undeniable fact. They force you to you cannot possibly talk about photons unless you talk about their wave property. There is no wave property. It's all nonsense. There's a frequency. Photons come at a frequency, like cannonballs at a frequency. That's all they are. The only time a photon, that's all it has. That's the only place the frequency exists, is that it's a quanta, a quanta, a quanta, a quanta at a distance from each other.
we don't go into science knowing the answer. We go seeking the answer.
Bullshit. You haven't sought anything. You're all truthers. You just fell in love with this idea of dualities and complex numbers, and that's all you did. Instead of really picking at it, you just went with the fairy unicorn nonsense. You didn't want to think OJ did it. You didn't want a material answer. So you invented the invisible man, and he did it. The invisible wave theory, the invisible Huygens effect, the invisible this, the invisible that. It's all invisible theories for which there's absolutely not one shred of evidence. It's just a damn religion.
Is trying to preserve locality, because a wave can hit a barrier, and if there's two slits in the barrier, propagate just in those places, because the wave hits.
Yeah, I know, but that doesn't make any sense between single slit and double slit. So again, quit talking about the double slit experiment. Explain the single slit experiment, and then explain the double slit experiment. But until you explain how you get two waves in the single slit experiment, don't talk to me about the double slit.
It's a whole barrier, and it's masked out. So suddenly locality's fine, because a wave can do that. Right.
Again, a wave that's not a round wave, it's a straight flat wave. So let's understand, it has to be a flat wave to work for the Huygens magic to happen. Alright, so explain how the photon creates a flat wave in front of it.
Right. The problem is that the particle only strikes one place on the target detector on the other side. At most one place. If it gets hit, it runs into the screen.
That's only one of your problems. The problem of the photon deciding which path to take is one of your problems. Okay, but it's only one of them. The other problem is, oh shit, I forgot it. Well, it doesn't matter.
So there's a coordination between the two slits in the screen that is difficult to explain, and you can't say it's explainable with the one slit experiment.
Well, the one slit experiment, like it's just some sort of bullshit. No, the fact is it's just bullshit to talk about two slits when the single slit does exactly the same thing. That's the place where that's where you have a dilemma. That's the Schrodinger's cat problem. That's the thing you have to fucking explain. How does a single slit create two waves that interfere with each other? That's the problem. And that's when you start playing this stupid Huygens game, and it's entirely made up. There's no evidence of this infinite number of waves being created by a photon, for fuck's sake. The smallest thing known in the universe, the smallest quanta of energy in the universe.
Because the pattern is changing if you move the other slit. How can there be an interference pattern from the one-slit experiment that's affected by the two-slit experiment when you're putting the particles through one at a time.
Does that make any sense to you? I listened to that like 6 times. I still can't make any sense. The one slit is affected by the two slit. No, you're not making any sense. So I've obviously explained how changing the size of the slit, if there was energy between the two slits, that the energy would be changed between the two slits, a force. If there was force between the two slits, between any slit, that the force would change as you make things closer together. You change the force. That's the inverse square law. The protons get weaker, the electrons get stronger as you close the gap. As the gap gets narrower, protons stronger, electrons weaker. Electrons stronger, protons weaker. And as I widen the slit, protons stronger, electrons weaker. That's how it works. That's Maxwell's equations.
And that's why locality is an important thing. And the reason I believe it's all really waves is because of the locality.
Right, so he thinks it's all waves. He won't even give it, there's no particles at all. It's all just wavy crap. Wave, some kind of wave in the non-medium. Things are just waving around, made out of nothing, just going whirly, 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 spurly, burly. No evidence that a photon has a single electric or magnetic property. No evidence of it whatsoever. A photon can't be bent. You can put a photon in a nuclear accelerator with those gigantic fucking magnets and all that fucking energy, and you can't bend it, not a tiniest bit. You can't make a photon ever move just the tiniest friggin' bit. With all the energy, they could pump a zillion, billion fucking nuclear power plants worth of energy into the goddamn fucking whatever it's called, the halon bullshit fucker, whatever thingy it is, and it's not going to happen. They're not going to bend a fucking photon because it's not moved by force.
Superposition.
And it has to hit an electron to be bent.
Issue is the part that relates to superposition, or even more so the idea where they say the particle might be in two places.
Right. So again, a simple concept. Superposition started off as just being the idea that if these things are creating force, if a proton is creating a force and an electron is creating force, the two forces don't mix. They can only be mixed, so to speak, when a third body enters their influence, and now the third body will do what this one's saying, and it'll do what this one's saying, and after it's done what both of them are saying, there'll be an end product. It does the math. The third thing is the equal sign.
Because trying to save locality, we get the wave. But then, what about the particle?
Again, there is no wave. Again, I'll just point out again, this is what a photon is doing. Same polarization at a specific time interval. So this is the time interval. Okay, this is a polarized quanta. There could be other quanta in here, but it's a different polarization. So it's X polarization, let's say. And the only thing that matters is that these are at specific distances, the ones of the same polarization. That's a photon. Alright, gravity would be round 1, x1, 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 round 1, xxx, round, xx, round. It would be completely scattered code. And magnetism would be x, 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 or O, 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 O. That's force. That's all the forces in the universe right there. All it is X's and O's. Okay, and when you mix them a certain way, at a certain pattern, you'll see it. Like it'll be electromagnetic radiation. It'll be photons if it has a frequency of polarization. When there's no frequency of polarization, it's gravity. And when it's all polarization, it's goddamn magnetism. There. Problem solved. Physics unified. Gamey ovary.
What's the locality of the particle? What's the reality of the particle?
I didn't even get into that crap, but yeah, their theory is this photon doesn't even know where the fuck it is. That's why they don't care where it goes into the slit. They don't care whether it's here or in the middle or over here, because they just consider every single photon as being all over this fucking place. You don't even think it has a position.
Going both ways. Where's the particle that whole time? And you can either say, well, there really isn't a particle until the wave that we surmise interacts with the screen.
Right, the wave in the non-medium. Let's get this straight again. Mediums carry waves, but they only carry waves because they're carrying a frequency. Again, frequency, they're saying every time there's a frequency of something, it's a wave. So if I shoot bullets one every 10 seconds, they're saying I'm waving bullets. Is that what I'm doing? I'm waving bullets? No, it's not what I'm doing.
And it creates the artifact we know as particle collision. So what's happening in the meanwhile? Well, either it doesn't exist and there's a collapse.
Well, in the meanwhile, like I said, what they never considered was the simple observable truth. That the photon, some of them go right near the edge, some of them go right straight through the middle. And depending on how close they go to the surface, they end up at a different location on the target. That's unconsiderable. We cannot even consider that theory. That is a sacrilege. That is a crime. That's not accepting their truther theory. Okay, that's a heresy. Okay, against quantum. To sit there and blame the matter. To say the matter made the photon do it. Heresy. I violated the God. Quantum.
It seems kind of silly, but it's on the table.
Yeah, everything's on the damn table. The invisible man's on the table, the invisible rabbit's on the table, the invisible rat's on the table, the invisible the invisible dug up dead Tyrannosaurus skeleton is on the table. Anything they can make up in their imagination is somehow on the fucking table. We don't need any fucking evidence. We don't need anything to back it up. If we can make it up and make it sound okay, yes, the invisible man cut OJ's wife's head off. He then cut OJ's finger, he left he had a big pair of fake shoes, and he left a bunch of fake footprints. Yes, sir, that fucking invisible man sure is a clever motherfucker. And that's what they've done to photons. They turned fucking photons into magical invisible men with magical powers. They could do almost anything. They make infinite number of waves. They can go infinite number of places. They can fly to Pluto faster than the speed of light and then jump into an airplane and fly the back home faster than we even knew what the fuck happened. They're so fucking creative.
Or many histories, and it somehow goes...
and it goes into 15 other dimensions, and every time the photon moves one, photon forward, every time it moves one little tiny bit forward, oh, new universe created, yep, start all over, new universe. Yeah, just brilliant made-up shit.
Through both slits.
I mean, that is just so fucking Holy Ghost. I mean, the multiverse is just a whole... That's not even a Jesus theory. It's not a God theory. It's some kind of really wacky fucking Holy Ghost theory. I mean, it's just so fucking silly. Nobody can explain that. That's just too fucking stupid. I mean, I can't believe they sell this shit to people and they buy it. People eat this crap.
And that violates the realism. Both of those violate a realism.
No, and they violate the rules of evidence, like you have to have some. I mean, fuck. Some kind of evidence. What evidence do you have besides, well, that could work if there are invisible men and invisible Tyrannosauruses that are skeletons. Well, if that can happen, then sure, that could be the explanation.
The pilot wave theory maintains the realism, comes up with another...
I wonder who the pilot is. Dopey or stupidity whoopity.
Mathematics that could possibly explain the interference because the pilot wave is the thing that goes through both slits. The problem there is it violates locality because there is a coordinate...
And it also violates things like... photons can't do that. Like, how do they interact with the matter in that form and way? And such.
Coordination between that pilot wave which is throughout the whole universe.
Oh, sure it is. Now the photons are as big as the whole universe. Smallest thing in the universe is now bigger than the whole fucking universe.
And that particle that's guiding it to where it's going to go. Right.
First off, none of that is even possible, right? A pilot wave could never even move faster than the speed of light. We've already established that that would be communication at a distance, and then there would be some evidence of this communication at a distance. So, you know, on the big scale, it takes a while. Like if I drop a bucket, it takes a while for the bucket to get to the ground, and frankly, the speed of light of the force is going to move so much faster than the speed of the bucket. But when you get onto the small micro quantum level, no, that's not. There's a speed difference between electrons and photons, but it's not nearly as slow as the material speed difference. I mean, matter is really fucking slow. Electrons are slow, but they're not nearly as slow as real matter. So the wave would never be traveling fast enough, and a photon is already moving the speed of light. So the wave would be moving as fast as the photon. So if you had this idea the photon is bouncing and creating a pilot wave, the speed of the pilot wave would be just as fast as the speed of the bounce. It can't bounce faster than the wave, so the wave could never propagate anywhere, but it could never get anywhere because the photon and the speed of the wave are the same speed.
And so we have a spooky action at a distance. Of course, there's other ways to explain that. Maybe time truly is reversible. Determinists have a lot of options open to them.
Yeah, determinists have options to go back in time. Yeah, right, sure they do. No. Time is a function. When you use it up, it's used up. It's like you're saying you're going to, well, you could make fires go backwards. Oh, you can? Oh, so let's just use that trick. Let's just make the fire unburn the forests. No, can't do it. Stupid.
How, waves might propagate back in time and whatnot.
Oh, yeah, it might do this and they might do that. See, all this crap is useless. So why don't you just stay on the subject instead of doing this shit? You were bad enough when you just had your wacky Huygens and your wacky Heisenberg and your wacky. And now you're going double, triple, quadruple, wacky to the 10th power. What for? You're not explaining anything with this wacky crap.
And help guide an event to its occurrence.
You're certainly not debunking my theory. Not even coming close to debunking it.
It's caused the thing, an event backwards in time causes the cause, and all that's quite weird too. And it's very hard, if you're careful like other people besides you are, to navigate.
Yeah, they're not very careful. Like, okay, there's lots of examples I wanted to give, this experiment not being done in lots of ways. But heat would be interesting. If you heat the slits, what happens? Because that's going to create a little bit more energy. But it's just infrared, so it probably won't change anything. So there's lots of things you can do. Because, I was thinking of mirrors. I got a microscope. I'm going to try putting little lines on a mirror. But I don't think it would matter because absorption and reflection end up being the same amount of EMF energy. So it's probably not going to change anything. But the real one that gives it away, though, is tubes. If you shoot light through a tube, that really creates a problem. And the problem is because now the flat surface is rolled. So, when you have a tube, a long tube, what you basically have done is change the charged surfaces out here and inside. And so you've changed the flat surface and rolled it. And so the lines, the field lines would be going like this out of the ends. And so it wouldn't be the same at all. And you'd also have the problem that when the light goes in, it's going to get diffracted into the surfaces. And so it just keeps crashing into the surfaces. So I think if you did use little tiny narrow tubes that were, say, a foot long, you'd probably get no light out of the end. It probably just gets all whacked into infrared heat. And that's because it got diffracted right at the source. So that's the key here thing too, is to understand that the light is getting bent when it goes into the curve, if it hits the curve, and it's getting bent when it goes out. So it's getting bent in one direction coming in, and if it hits the electron going out, it goes in this direction. So it just depends on what electron it hits last, of course. If this is the last electron it hit, then it's going to end up going this way. If this is the last electron it hit, it goes this way. And if it hits straight ones in the middle, then it's fine. It'll just go out straight. but it can hit more. The photon can hit more than one electron is the key, and it hits them going in and it hits them going out. That was important to add.
The two-slit experiment, and not give up either your concept of realism or your concept of locality. Saying that you want both of them, well, you do appeal to authority, Gary. But
no, I don't, and that's just bullshit. And the authority isn't just me. The authority is Newton. The authority is Feynman. I quote Einstein. I quote lots of good science from good scientists. I just sit there and point out to you that those arguments are out there, and that this isn't as insane as you think. Newton considered particle gravity. He liked it.
But you don't have the decency to make it any other authority but yourself. You're the authority, and you feel it in your gut. You promise us the math.
That has nothing to do with feeling it in my gut. I didn't promise you any math. I said to you the variables are the same. What math am I going to? What new variable am I going to create? Idiot. Now the only new variable is where the field lines are lined up, and that's just going to be a replacement for your geometry. You know, for the sine theta. So the only thing I'm going to change is sine theta. I'm going to replace it with pressure of the electron. So instead of sine theta, it's going to be pressure on the electron. Okay? But that's it. The rest of the variables are solid variables. How wide the slit is a solid variable. How big the impediment in the middle is a solid variable. Obviously, I think they've got to pay attention to what kind of light is going in. You know, whether it's coned light or whether it's flat, coherent.
Will work out. Well, I have some experience with math.
Well, apparently you don't have enough experience to sit there and show me the fucking equation of the two-slit math that gets you this pattern, the real pattern. The pattern that has bars that go to 0 here, okay? For a period of 4, maybe 3, for a period of 3 bars, there's no light. The light's missing. Where did it go? Where is the light? Why is there no bars here? There should be bars here. That's what the math says. There should be bars there. Where are they?
And we're not even going to get any math from your system because you're not going to do that.
Well, see, that's another you say so. Again, I don't have to remake some of the math. Some of the math is solid. Okay? The inverse square law is solid. Maxwell's equations are, generally speaking, pretty solid. So what math do you want, you dumb cunt?
And if you try...
It's your model that's broken, you stupid shit. It's not the mathematical model that's broken. It's your fucking physical model that's broken. How is Huygens represented in the single slit? How does Huygens, does the infinite number of little wavelets and all of that crap have some mathematical component besides the fact that they just put a 2 in the equation and now multiply the 2 waves? Besides that, how is Huygens, the creation of an infinite number of waves in your model, how does your model get represented in the math? The only way it gets represented in the math is just adding the number 2.
You'll find, no, you can't make one slit interactions explain why moving the other slit affects the pattern. That's never...
You can't possibly do it. Well, I just did it, jackass.
Never going to happen.
Never going to happen, he says. Oh, we can't possibly come up with a material explanation for the function of the universe. That would be silly. We have to keep saying matter doesn't do anything. All those photons and electrons in matter don't do anything. It's the photons that do everything.
That's like picking yourself up by your bootstraps 3 feet off the ground. Not going to happen.
Okay, well, I'm going to shove those words so far. I'm going to shove them in your mouth. They're going to come out your ass, and then go back in your mouth, and they're going to come out your ass. Fuck you, forever.
I can predict with confidence
Oh yeah, you go ahead and you want to predict with what confidence that you'll just get off the fucking internet and you'll shut your fucking lying mouth, okay? Because that's all you've been through this whole fucking encounter is a fucking liar. You can't paraphrase me correctly. You don't listen to the goddamn arguments being made. You don't counter argument a single goddamn thing I say. You're just a lying propagandist for a fucking religion.
That can't happen. If the pattern changes because of the other slit, then
Again, he keeps moving the slit when that means widening the impediment. Fucking idiot.
physically the other slit is involved, and it's away from the first slit, and the screen is away, so there's issues of locality. And as soon as you say, okay, something went through both slits, whether...
Yeah, well, I'm not going to say that. I'm never going to say that because it's stupid. It's fucking stupid. Photons, the smallest thing in the universe, do not occupy an amount of space 1 billion times their size. Idiot. All right, I'm almost out of time, so we'll let it go here, and hopefully the camera saves properly. Thank you very much.